The year was 1964, in a dimly lit boxing gym on the outskirts of Oakland, California. The heavy bag swung lazily in the stale air, and the smell of sweat and leather hung thick like a warning. What happened inside those walls over the next few minutes would never make the newspapers. There would be no police report, no hospital records, no official documentation of any kind. And yet among those who were there, trainers, fighters, a handful of onlookers who had wandered in from the street, the story would be passed down for decades, spoken in low voices, always with the same mixture of disbelief and awe. This is one of those stories. It wasn't a place for the uninitiated. The gym was a sanctuary of grit, presided over by Earl Rollins, a man whose face was a map of every punch he'd ever taken as a professional heavyweight. In this world, respect wasn't given, it was extracted through rounds of punishment. Into this arena stepped a 23-year-old instructor named Bruce Lee. At the time, he was a ghost to the public. No cinematic legacy, no global fame, just a man running a small school that dared to teach anyone regardless of their heritage. This inclusivity had already painted a target on his back within the traditionalist circles of Chinatown. But here, in Rollins's gym, the friction wasn't about culture, it was about raw, unadulterated combat. Rollins didn't bother to look up from the rhythm of his speed bag, but Victor Galindo did. Galindo was a powerhouse cruiserweight, a man who viewed martial arts as a decorative performance rather than a practical science. To him, Lee's arrival in a black silk jacket was an intrusion, a circus act wandering into a lion's den. Lee had been invited by a mutual acquaintance to demonstrate his philosophy, but Galindo only saw a small target. The atmosphere in the gym shifted instantly. The rhythmic thudding of gloves stopped. The skipping ropes went silent. A predatory tension filled the room as Galindo approached, his massive frame towering over the visitor. The confrontation began not with a punch, but with a verbal challenge. Galindo mocked the very idea of kung fu, reducing a centuries-old discipline to flying kicks and funny noises. He sneered at Lee, asking if he'd brought any boards to break for their amusement. Lee remained an island of stillness. He didn't flinch, didn't retreat, and didn't raise his voice. He simply watched, his eyes scanning the environment with a cold, tactical precision that only a true fighter would recognize as dangerous. When Galindo stepped into Lee's personal space, the air grew heavy with the scent of imminent violence. The insult that broke the dam was a glob of saliva. Galindo spat directly onto Lee's chest, a gesture of ultimate degradation. For a heartbeat, time seemed to suspend itself. Galindo turned his head to share the laugh with his peers, confident in his dominance. He never saw the retaliation. In less than a second, Lee's hand bridged the gap. It wasn't a traditional boxing hook, it was a lightning-fast strike to the throat that paralyzed the nervous system of Galindo. Before the boxer could even register the shock, a palm heel strike rattled his temple, scrambling his equilibrium. Lee didn't stop to admire the effect. He followed up with a surgical low kick to the side of Galindo's knee, a strike designed to collapse the structure of the joint. In 4 seconds, the circus act had dismantled the professional fighter. Galindo hit the concrete like a felled tree, gasping for air and clutching a leg that no longer obeyed him. The gym remained paralyzed in shock. Rollins, finally ceasing his work, stared at the young man who hadn't even broken a sweat. There was no boasting from Lee. He simply stated that kung fu was about efficiency, not performance, then turned his gaze toward the veteran Rollins. A silent recognition passed between the old lion and the new one. Rollins ordered ice for his fallen fighter and a chair for the stranger. As they sat across from each other, the veteran heavyweight didn't ask how, but rather why. He realized he was looking at a methodology that ignored the sport of fighting in favor of the reality of it. Lee explained that he was building a system, Jeet Kune Do, that stripped away the useless rituals of the past to find what actually worked under pressure. He wasn't there to show off, he was there to find a missing piece of his own puzzle. Lee admitted he was fast and precise, but he lacked the experience of absorbing heavy punishment. He knew that his enemies, the traditionalists who hated his open-door policy, would eventually stop sending messages and start sending men. He anticipated a swarm, a multiple attacker scenario where speed alone might not save him if the first strike failed. He proposed a trade. He would teach Rollins the secrets of his speed and timing. In exchange, Rollins would teach him how to survive a beating. He wanted to learn how to get hit and keep moving. Rollins accepted the risk. For the next 19 mornings, before the sun touched the Oakland pavement, the two met in the empty gym. It was a brutal education. Rollins didn't hold back, using wooden staffs to strike Lee's ribs and limbs, forcing him to maintain his mental clarity through waves of physical agony. They weren't sparring for points, they were conditioning a human being to become unbreakable. Lee didn't try to win these sessions. He focused entirely on endurance and the redirection of force. By the end of the 3 weeks, Lee's body was a map of bruises, but his spirit was forged in iron. On the 20th day, the prophecy came true. 7 men, led by a seasoned traditionalist, stormed Lee's school at dusk. They came to enforce the old ways, believing their numbers would overwhelm the rebel. They found Lee alone, prepared and waiting. The ensuing struggle was a blur of motion. While history debates the exact duration, the outcome was undeniable. Lee utilized every ounce of the endurance he had cultivated with Rollins. He took the hits that were meant to floor him, absorbed the pain, and neutralized each attacker with terrifying efficiency. When the dust settled, Lee stood among the wreckage of his opponents. He was injured, cracked ribs, a fractured hand, a split lip, but he was the last man upright. He looked down at the leader and told him to carry a message back, that numbers wouldn't be enough to stop the evolution of the art. News of the victory reached Rollins a few days later. The old boxer didn't say a word to anyone else about their secret training. He simply sat in his gym, reflecting on the young man who had asked to suffer so that he might never be defeated. Rollins realized then that he hadn't just trained a student, he had witnessed the birth of a legend. He had been looking at the future of combat, and for once, the future was faster than anything he had ever seen.